Hey, welcome to episode 77 of the Gig Life podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. Hope you're starting to get your head around this whole COVID-19 thing. Just a quick note on that. This episode with Darryn Farrugia was recorded on the 22nd of March 2020. So at that stage, all the current restrictions were not in place. So just keep that in mind as Darryn and I chat about that at the start of the interview. Okay, episode 77. Darryn Farrugia, here we go. My guest today is Australian drumming legend Darryn Farrugia. When I was a beginner drummer in New Zealand in the early 90s, there wasn't much access to international drummers apart from, say, Modern Drummer magazine or the Starlicks or DCI videos. So I used to sit down every Saturday night and study Darryn doing his thing as the house band drummer on Hey Hey It's Saturday. He used to blow me away with his playing and crack me up with his quirk and sticking his head in the TV shot where it wasn't supposed to be. So Dad studied with Frank Corniola and Virgil Donati, and he also spent time in the US studying with Marthin Smitty Smith and Joe Morello. One day, Darryn got a call to dep for Virgil on the Bert Newton show, which ended up opening some doors and eventually led him to his call up to Hey Hey It's Saturday. Through Hey Hey, he's got to play with Tom Jones, Tina Arena, the Commodores, Trisha Yearwood, Joe Cocker, B.B. King, Bonnie Raitt, Jeff Skunk Baxter, Randy Crawford, Roger Daltrey, Barry Manilow, Jackson Brown, Renee Gayer, Thelma Houston, Tommy Emmanuel, and that's just to name a few. Darryn started teaching at the age of 16 and has maintained that right through his career. As well as spending a few years teaching in the UK, he's released a couple of books called Groove Perspectives and Groove Perspectives Play Along. And he has a top-notch drumming YouTube channel which has great content, looks awesome and sounds fantastic. Along with all that, he's a pretty mean woodworker, and he shares an alter ego by the name of Giuseppe the Giraffe on his Instagram. So go check that out. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big welcome to Darryn Farrugia. Cheers. All right, I think we're rolling. Welcome to the Gig Life podcast, Darryn Farrugia.
What a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Stevie.
Mate, how you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Not too bad. Crazy fucking times, though.
Man, I can't believe it. Like, I actually officially have no work.
Oh, wow. So just so you know, people, today is the 22nd of March, right in the middle of COVID-19 craziness. As of about half an hour ago, looks like Victoria and New South Wales are going into lockdown. All non-essential services will be stopped. For me, I don't know how that's going to affect me yet. I'll find that out tomorrow.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and yeah, like you're saying, all your work's gone.
Yeah, well, at the start of this week, it might have been Monday, I got my first email to say that a gig that I had in April had been cancelled. And that's when it kind of started to hit me. And then over the next few days, as things changed in the media and the circumstances had changed, more and more of my gigs got cancelled. So I thought, well, this is fine. At least I can rely on teaching because I've got a few students that come to me privately.
Yeah.
But I guess that's not going to be happening either.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works.
I don't know how that works. Yeah, I guess that's up to you and your students to suss it out, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, do you have the option to switch it to like a video lesson?
So I've done one Skype lesson so far. So I'm going to look into that with my students, and if they want that as an option. But yeah, there's just a few things to check out, a bit of research to do, just to see where things are at now, because it's a constantly evolving situation.
It sure is.
It's incredible.
It sure is, and yeah, lots getting said about it, and there's a lot of fear mongering going on, and you can't get too caught up in social media because. Man, there's some bullshit on there at the moment, eh? It's just crazy.
I know.
So yeah, we're just trying to keep our head here, and just keep our family safe. And we've had the kids home from school all this week. Although schools are all open, I believe they shouldn't be. And by the time this podcast comes out, I'm sure they'll be closed. But
yeah,
it was our view to pull them out, which we did. Yeah. So
man, it's so weird.
Yeah. All right, let's leave that for a bit. I want to talk about how I first got to know about Darryn Farrugia. When I was living in New Zealand in the early 90s, there used to be this variety TV show called Hey Hey It's Saturday. It was the first variety TV show that I'd ever seen in New Zealand, and being an up-and-coming drummer, the only sort of access I had, as anybody did back in those times, was Mod Drummer magazine, which came out once a month at the store, a few Starlix videos, and you were on TV. So I used to sit up every Saturday night and watch you play, watch the show and watch you play, and just on that red Yamaha kit, and used to stick your head where it wasn't supposed to go and pull faces, and it was great, man. So yeah, you had a big part of my early drumming upbringing, So I just wanted I wanted to tell you that.
Thanks, Stevie. It's an honor. As I was saying, I'm all these. The show finished just over 20 years ago, and all these years later, I'm still getting comments like the one you just gave me. The situation where people will say to me that they used to watch the show, and they would they play the drums, or did play the drums as kids, and they used to watch me on TV, and it's still a bit weird for me, even all these years later. The fact that it's all these years later makes it even more weird, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's nice. It's I can't ask for any more than that. It's very special that people would, because I'm actually quite dare I say it, a very sentimental person. So if I meet a drummer who's had a very strong influence on me, local drummer or an international drummer, I get really gushy and sentimental about it, and I want to tell them how much they meant to me.
That's exactly what I do. I don't know if you've heard my podcast, but I've just about had all my favourite drummers, local drummers, on the show now. So it's been great, man. I'm the same. It's like I want to tell you what I think, and sometimes it goes down well, and other guys are a little bit, oh yeah, okay, back off a little.
No, I laugh it all up, mate. I have no pride. I laugh it all up.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. All right, so before we get back into sort of where we're at now, and also more into Hey Hey, let's roll right back to the early days. Were you born in Melbourne?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Okay, so you've always been in Melbourne? I know you've moved overseas a bit. I understand that.
Yeah, so basically, I've lived my whole life in Melbourne, except for a 4.5 year period where I lived in London. Mm-hmm. So basically, Melburnian, born and bred.
Right, and your father's a drummer?
Yeah, he actually retired from drumming about 10 years ago. After he had a double bypass, he had double bypass surgery, and I think from that point on, he just didn't want to drive around to gigs at night and lug gear around.
Yeah,
and
right.
He's in his mid-70s now, so he's just. He was never a full-time drummer. He only ever played on the weekends, but it was enough for me to learn a lot from going to see him play, and certainly my earliest inspiration was him. He was the only drummer I knew.
Yeah, and who was some of the drummers he was listening to that obviously you would have got to hear?
Well, my dad sort of made me aware of drummers like Buddy Rich, Joe Morello, but my dad, probably listened mostly to, country music, and he was a fan of the Rolling Stones, and and early rock and roll. So my parents' record collection or my dad's record collection sort of comprised mostly of Johnny Cash records, Elvis Presley, and Creedence Clearwater, which I played to a lot of those. There's one particular album that I played to a lot, which was Willie and the Poor Boys, and I'm talking about when I was 10,
right,
10 years old.
So when did you start playing? 5? Were you 4 or 5?
Yeah, I think my parents bought me my first kit when I was about 5.
Right,
and then and they sent me to lessons when I was about 6. And I had lessons for a little while. I was a bit too stupid and didn't have a long enough attention span to really understand what was going on in terms of reading music and learning to play paradiddles and stuff. But I kept playing. So, at the age of 10, I got my second kit or my third kit by that stage.
Yeah.
My third kit at the age of 10, which was a hand-me-down.
Jeez, you're doing
from
all
my
right
dad.
there.
It was a hand-me-down from my dad, which I still have. I still have that kit. I still use it. So it's the first kit I ever played.
Is that your Ludwig kit?
No, it's actually a Japanese kit from the late 60s,
Okay.
Which is a Boston kit. So my dad had that. He was working with that, and then they bought me a couple of kits, and then eventually I got the Boston kit for my 10th birthday when my dad bought himself in 1977 or 76, he bought himself a pearl wood fiberglass kit. And those kits are worth a lot of money now, so he still has it.
Oh, awesome.
I from at the age of 10, I was playing along to, Hot August Night by Neil Diamond. There was a Tom Jones record I used to play along to, and I ended up getting that record signed by Tom Jones when I got to play with him on Hey Hey Saturday, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And then after that, from about the age of 12, I started doing gigs, just playing in a wedding band, like a dance band with some kids that were older than me.
Mm. What kind of music? Were you into jazz at that stage?
No, at that stage, the only music that I was really aware of in terms of a sort of dance band or wedding band repertoire was the music that I heard my dad play. So I used to go to hear my dad play a lot. I just sort of learned all of these songs just by hearing them. So for a 12-year-old kid, I had a lot of repertoire. And then I didn't really get into jazz until I was maybe 13. When I say jazz, when I hit 13, I discovered George Benson.
Okay.
And I was listening to George Benson. A friend of mine gave me a tape of Weekend in LA with Harvey Mason, and that's kind of when I kind of zoned in on this music that wasn't, Elvis, Creedence, or whatever. It was sort of somewhat, more sophisticated, let's say.
Yep.
And so I was, to give you an example, in 1977, I went to see ABBA. That was my first concert. In 1980, 3 years later, I went to see George Benson. That was my second concert. So in a 3-year period, I went from ABBA to George Benson.
Right.
So that's when I kind of started listening to drummers with a lot of interest. So on those George Benson records, it was Harvey Mason was playing drums certainly on the records that I had. And then one of my cousins bought me another George Benson record, and it had 2 drummers on it. There was Harvey Mason, who I was very familiar with, and there was this other guy that I hadn't quite, just heard his name mentioned a couple of times, and that was Steve Gadd. And I remember hearing Steve Gadd for the first time. By this stage, I'm 14 or 15. I remember hearing Steve Gadd for the first time on a track, not knowing it was actually Steve Gadd, and something about it just sounded different to me. It sounded polished. It really tickled my ears. It was really beautiful. And that, when I found out it was Steve Gadd, and then everyone was talking about Steve Gadd, that's when that's really when my obsession began. And then two other things happened, or 3 other things happened around that time. This is sort of like me coming out of or at least going into the cocoon, let's say. When I was 14, I saw David Jones play. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with David Jones.
Oh, yeah, he's been on the show. Yeah,
great.
His name comes up a lot.
Yeah, well,
he's talked about a lot.
My dad there used to be these music expos where they would like trade shows, and my dad took me to one when I was 14, and there was David Jones drum clinic. Well, I didn't know what a drum clinic was. I had no idea what a drum clinic was. Mm-hmm. And as far as I knew, David Jones was the singer in the Monkees. But again, I heard this name coming up, David Jones, and so I heard him play for the first time, and he played, and then he spoke a lot because he was doing a clinic, and he was talking about how he was a full-time drummer. He was a professional drummer, and that was the day that changed my life. That's when I decided, well, that's what I want to do. I just want to play the drums full-time. I don't want to go to work and do that sort of stuff. So I made that decision on that day. And then, within a year of that, I saw Virgil Donati play on a TV show. And that's when I said to my dad, okay, I need a teacher because I want some of that stuff. And then at the same time, that's when I discovered that I was going to school with John Corniola, right, who's Frank's younger brother. And so John hooked me up with his brother. So, within this 12-month period, I saw David Jones play. I was friends with John. I saw Virgil play on TV. I made all these decisions about what career path I wanted. And I started studying with Frank, and I studied with Frank for 3 years, and it was the most enjoyable 3 years of my life, in lots of ways.
Right. And I don't know much about Frank. I know who he is. I've known who he is for a long time. He owns Drum Tech down there, doesn't he? Yep. What sort of music was he teaching you? Was he a jazz player?
No, he wasn't a jazz player so much. Frank was I was just lucky to get onto a teacher who had this really comprehensive method. So, my first lesson was, hand technique and getting my hands in shape and rudiments. And then that was, I was just working on my hands, constantly, like through every lesson, but, got me into reading and worked on my coordination and chart reading, rudiments. And it was just so comprehensive. And it's a funny thing because I just felt that it was such an honor to learn from Frank that, that he, I called him up and, after being introduced to him over the phone by his brother, I had a chat with Frank over the phone, and he said, look, I've got one vacancy left. I've got this guy I was teaching has gone overseas. I don't know when he's coming back, so I can slot you in. So he slotted me into this, his schedule. And so I was so honored that I just figured, okay, the pressure's on, I don't want to lose him as a teacher. I don't want him to sack me as a student. Yep. So I just went nuts and practiced for 4 hours a day.
Right.
And again, it wasn't till all of these years later, like when I was in my 40s, that he said to me that, I learned more in those 3 years than he would have taught someone in 5 or 6 years. Wow. And that was just me in some ways being really naive, but also just really wanting to please him and make him happy because I respected him so much, still do. So I just practiced. I just went nuts practicing and just devoured all of this information that he was giving me.
You started studying with Virgil as well, didn't you?
Yeah. So after I think I learned from Frank for about 3 years, and then I started. I was going to see Virgil Donati play a lot, and so when I was in college, I approached him for lessons, and he ended up being my teacher for about 3 months. It wasn't a long period because he was really busy. But I got so much out of that 3 months. That was another sort of intense period. And I basically went to him for 2 reasons. Because he was a drummer that I was seeing a lot, like I would go and see him every week. It was going to make the learning process quite easy because I could ask him questions about what he did at gigs or whatever. And I went to him because I wanted to sort of work on my technique a little further. And we know Virgil has incredible technique. But what people generally don't know about Virgil is that he studied with Philly Joe Jones, the great jazz drummer. And so I asked Virgil if he could show me some of the stuff that Philly Joe gave him. And which he did, which was really great. And he's a great teacher too. I really enjoyed learning from him.
Mm. You headed over to the States a bit to study. So how did that come about?
While I was finishing up at college, I applied to go to the Musicians Institute, which back in those days was like the Percussion Institute of Technology, the PIT.
Right.
And I got accepted, but I didn't have the money to do the course. And so what I did instead was I just worked, saved a lot of money, and then headed over to the States just to take some private lessons with some people. And I got to have some lessons in New York with, Marvin Smitty Smith, Adam Nussbaum. That was at the Drummers Collective. And then I was also heading over to New Jersey to have some lessons with Joe Morello.
Oh, wow.
And I think I was in New York for about 6 weeks. I crammed a lot into a short amount of time. And I also went to Los Angeles as part of that trip. I got to see a lot of great gigs. I went to a lot of gigs. I got to see, I went to the first Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship concert. So I got to see Gad, Weckl, Vinny. I saw Joe Morello, Louis Belson. I got to see Harvey Mason play. I just got to see everyone play. I got to see Art Blakey play, Mickey Roker. Who else did I see? Tom Breckline. I had a lesson with him and saw him play at a gig. It's quite an extensive. I went to the Baked Potato. Got to see Carlos Vega play. Right. Who again is one of my favorite drummers. So that was an intense. That was. In total, I was out of town for 11 weeks. So part of that was spent in Los Angeles, and part of it was spent in Europe. And again, it just taking in all of this information like a sponge.
Right. You mentioned Marvin Smitty Smith. He was drummer for Arsenio Hall show.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. Was he doing that show around that time you were getting lessons?
No, this was before that. So, actually, while I was in Los Angeles, I went and did a Paramount Studios tour. Right. And we ended up on the set of Arsenio Hall, and the band was rehearsing, and it was Terry Lynn Carrington playing drums.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I remember Tony Levin was playing bass. So at that stage, Marvin was still living in New York.
Right.
And I would also say that at that stage in the 80s, Marvin and let's say Jeff Tain Watts was, those two were the New York heavyweights, in the jazz scene. I think back in those days, I think Dave Weckl was still living in New York as well. But yeah, Marvin, I think, ended up moving to Los Angeles sometime later and did that show.
Okay. The reason I asked that, I was thinking if he was doing that show and you had the lessons with him, was there anything that you sort of took back for when you're on Hey Hey? Was there anything that he would have ever told you about being a TV drummer? That's why I thought that.
Funnily enough, that didn't happen. But I, on another trip to New York, I think that was into the US in 1999. I was still doing Hey Hey It's Saturday, and I caught up with Marvin, and he actually remembered teaching me, which was really nice.
Wow,
I caught up with him, and at that stage we both had our own TV gigs. So we talked a little about that.
That's cool.
And actually, it was on that same trip in '99 that I actually got to go to the Letterman show, and watch that show, and just take in that incredible band
Anton
with Anton
Fig,
Fig.
right? Yeah.
It was amazing.
He was because like I said earlier, I used to watch you on Hey Hey It's Saturday, and then later on, Letterman, I think a couple of years later, Letterman started showing in New Zealand. So I would stay up and then watch Anton Fig, And when I used to play his signature Vic Firth sticks, the really long ones, back when he was playing those sticks. And it's funny how it all we all kind of connect somehow, eh? Yeah,
It's great, man. It's so great. And you know, the world is a big place, but it's not that big now. Because the way we can communicate with each other instantly, and social media and just technology that allows us to do that. But even more so, it's just that connection that as a drumming community is really amazing. I love it. Like, I love being part of the community. And whenever I go to drumming events and just catch up with people, and then I start to see the children of people who I used to teach,
right,
and their dads who were students of mine are saying, "Hey, listen, I'd really like you to teach my kid." All of that sort of stuff. I love it.
Speaking of a drumming event, this was probably mid-2000s, I reckon. You played a Sydney drumming event here in Sydney at the...
Yeah.
Can't remember. I was trying to remember the name of the thing today, but I couldn't remember it anyway. You did a clinic. You played for it was like a clinic. It's kind of a dark room. I think you were playing or demonstrating the new PDP drums. I think that's what it was. I was thinking about that today. Yeah. Anyway, so you were playing and you started off with the solo and you started doing this alternating flam thing on the hi-hats.
I remember that.
Do you? Do you remember the guy? Do you remember the guy that stood up and he put his hand up and he said, I don't think you're alternating your hands when you get really fast. I think you're just changing over to just right hand with the soft flam, because we couldn't see it. And you said, no, actually watch this, and you played it again, but you really accentuated your hands, and it was just, oh man, you just blazed it, eh?
The reason why I remember that is because I remember I was doing a solo. I started the solo on the hi-hat, and I remember that when I did the alternating flams, I got some reaction from the audience.
We were just like, whoa, look at this. It's like Tony Williams or something, And and then my mate stuck his hand up and said, no, I think like when it's starting to get fast, you're not alternating. And you said, no, I am. Watch this. That was pretty cool.
I think I did that. I did that show twice.
Yep.
And I think on that one that you were talking about, I think that was a Saturday afternoon.
It was an afternoon, Saturday afternoon. Yep.
And then on that particular show, Omar was on there.
Yep. He played late, but we missed that. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that, and I remember actually then flying back to Melbourne straight after that, going home, getting my suitcase, going back to the airport, and then flying to London.
Right.
But I do remember that. And there was another one that I did before that. It's the same event, but maybe a year or a couple of years before that. And I remember Chad Wackerman and Steve Smith were sitting next to each other in the audience while I was doing my workshop or whatever it was, and just thinking how surreal that was. I mean, it's just so stressful, having people like that you've listened to on records, and they're just in there sort of checking you out.
In one of your newsletters I read, you had a situation like that when Weckl was watching you. Dave Weckl
I talked about that in the last video that I put up.
That's right.
Yeah, a few days ago. Just because when you do gigs like the Drummers Weekend, and the thing in Sydney that I did, it's an international event, so those guys are going to be there checking you out. They want to know who the local guys are, and that happens, and there's no way around it. And sometimes if someone like Weckl's watching you, it's very nerve-wracking. Virgil or anyone like that. I had a similar experience where Vinny Colaiuta heard me play a set, and it was like, and I was playing a set with Kenny Kirkland, the late great piano player. And so here I am on stage playing with Kenny, and just, sort of torn between enjoying this experience of playing with Kenny Kirkland, but, Vinny Colaiuta was at the bar watching me play. And so there was this sort of these feelings of joy, and fear at the same time. It's terrifying, but you know, it's unavoidable at times. If you're going to put yourself out there, people are going to hear you play.
Has there been a situation like that where it's kind of overwhelmed you and you've made a big mistake that you reckon those guys would have heard?
Fortunately not. I think by that stage, because I was playing so much, weekly live to wear television, you do to some degree develop an ability to just zone in on what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I didn't sort of get to the point where I became so self-conscious or so self-aware that I completely botched it, fortunately.
Right. Okay, let's go back a bit now. Virgil ended up getting you your first TV gig, got you to Dep for him. So can you talk a little bit about that, how that kind of went down?
Well, if I go back to the lessons with Virgil, Virgil at that stage was really busy. Like he was the number one guy in Melbourne. He was doing all the sessions and just doing everything really. Mm-hmm. And while I was learning from him, I said, at the end of a lesson, I said, look, what do I have to do to make it into the music scene in Melbourne? And I expected him to give me some kind of advice, do this, contact these. But I expected it to be quite comprehensive. And all he said his reply was, you've got nothing to worry about. You've got the right attitude and the right approach. And that was it. And I wanted him to say more than that. So I kind of had to settle with being comforted by, well, at least I have the right attitude and the right approach. We'll see what happens. But, he was obviously a man of his word, because that's when I was 19. So 3 years later, when I was 22, he got me to Dep for him. So, 3 years for a 19-year-old is a significant length of time. But, obviously in that 3 years, I'd made enough of an impression and started to get some gigs and all that sort of stuff. So I started to gain some experience that he felt was good enough to ask me to Dep for him. So that was amazing. So I did the first show, and I'd never been into a TV studio before.
Right. What was the show? Sorry.
It was the Bert Newton show. So it was a live to wear midday show. Right. And I had to go in there, play live to wear, playing along to click, reading charts, playing on a kit that I couldn't adjust because there was no space for me to adjust it. So I was playing Virgil's kit. It was terrifying, but I wanted to make an impression, and so much so that the MD was happy with it, and he asked me. He said to me, "Look, I'll make sure I get you, and Virgil can't do any other shows." So I ended up depping on that. I think I did about 6 or 7 shows in that year, and that was it. Like that again. That sort of opened the floodgates. So that was in 1989, right? And then and then I didn't get the Hey Hey gig till 91.
Right. Who was on the Hey Hey gig before you?
The drummer before me was Ron Sandilands, who passed away just a little over a year ago. Okay.
How much were you playing? You just said that the floodgates opened after that sort of TV session. Why was that? Were the people seeing you perform, or was it the MD was starting to give you more work sort of outside with gigs? Or
Well, the MD was a gentleman by the name of Ross Burton, and who has also passed away. And Ross ran a recording studio. He was also the MD for Young Talentine, which was another variety show. I didn't get to play on that, but that was, David Jones used to do that, and I think Virgil ended up doing that too. So Ross was a musical director and a arranger, and he had this recording studio. And so through him, I ended up getting, just getting a lot more sessions. So my proper kind of recording career, like, as a, getting recording sessions, sort of happened as a result of that TV gig. And I think also then, if you can cut a live, I guess there's a certain benchmark. If you can cut a live to wear TV gig, I guess people must figure that, you are of a standard where you can sort of handle a bit of pressure and I could read charts and I could play with the click and all that sort of stuff. So that kind of meant that the guys who were playing on that show and other professional musicians would recommend me or book me for gigs. So sometimes it just takes one or two, really good experiences for that will open the doors to many opportunities.
Do you remember who you were listening to at that stage? Who were you getting kind of influenced by?
So at that time, drummer wise, I was probably listening to lots of Vinnie Colaiuta and Dave Weckl and Dennis Chambers, Tom Breckline, Carlos Vega, Jeff Porcaro. I mean, probably from about 14 or 15 through to about 19 or 20, it was Steve Gadd and Jeff Porcaro.
Right.
Because they were on every record that I ever bought.
And sometimes they were both on the same album.
Yeah. Look, man, I've got so many records where they, those Al Jarreau. Yeah. There's Ricky Lee Jones, Larry Carlton, Michael McDonald. There's just a whole bunch of records where those two guys just played on all of those records.
Yep. Good stuff. Okay, so let's start talking about Hey Hey, how that came about. What were you doing? Was it an audition or did you get asked to come and do the gig?
I got asked. So basically what happened was, so again, I'm just going to backtrack a year or two back from that period. So when I got back from the States, around the time that I was depping for Virgil on this TV show, I was also touring. I was in and out of town touring with the Seekers, and I actually didn't like touring. Right. So I had to say to them, look, I'm not going to do this gig anymore because I don't want to tour. And they thought that I was mad. And then the following year, I got the gig. I got the gig playing in Tommy Emmanuel's band. I did a whole bunch of gigs with that. I left that. People thought I was mad. People really thought I was mad.
Because of the touring?
I didn't. I wanted to establish myself in Melbourne. Like I really wanted to. Right. I didn't want to keep leaving town. Okay, I didn't want people to know that I was not in town. So, I left touring with the Seekers and I left touring with Tommy Emmanuel. Everyone thought I was crazy, but I was, quite determined to, work on my having a good reputation in Melbourne. Mm. And so one night I was doing a gig, a jazz gig in town, and there was a gentleman there by the name of Graham Lyle, who was a musical director. And at that stage, he was the musical director or had been the musical director for the Don Lane Show. So I grew up knowing who he was. And he heard me play and we knew each other. And then at the end of the gig, he was just really complimentary, which really meant a lot to me because he's someone who I respect. Mm. And maybe towards the end of that year, I think it was, I got some, some of my friends were saying, they're going to put a new band into Hey Hey It's Saturday, and Graham Lyle's the musical director. And one of my friends was saying, maybe you should call him. And I said, no, I just didn't know what to do. Anyway, a friend of mine, a trumpet player by the name of Dave Newdick, said, Graham Lyle's going to call you. And I knew what it was about. So, I was kind of hoping to get this phone call, and he gave me a phone call. It was like, I remember it was 2 days before Christmas, 1990. And he basically just said, do you want to be the drummer on Hey Hey It's Saturday? And I said, Absolutely, yeah. Like all my Christmases came at once. So he said, okay, that's great. And then he said, okay, so while I'm here, can I also book you for next year's Logie Awards? And there's an album that we're going to do with Deborah Byrne. So
Fantastic.
it was incredible. Like, and at that stage, I was 23 and just overwhelmed. Like I just could not believe my luck. Because, this is a show I grew up watching since I was a kid, like from 1972. It was my Saturday morning fix. And then, I watched it all through high school, and then I got the gig on the show. So I was really familiar with the format and how it worked and how wacky and zany everyone was. And, I can be wacky and zany myself. So it was kind of it was like the perfect gig for me.
How long did that run for?
Well,
while you were in that band?
9 years while I was in it.
9 years. Right.
So I saw it through to the end, but it had been running for, I think, 22 years the whole thing that ran for 27 years. So I guess it ran for about 17 or 18 years before I did it.
Yeah, I like I said, I only know your phase of it. I didn't really know it was on before that, because in New Zealand we never had it.
Yeah.
Before that.
Yeah.
Before that stage. All right. So, what's a week in the life on Hey Hey It's Saturday? So when would your week start for the show, or was it one of those cases where you're just in for a rehearsal during one day?
Not even that. Everything was done on the day. So in my first year of doing the show, we would pre-record the show on a Friday. The show was pre-recorded on the Friday, so we'd get there at, say, about 9 o'clock in the morning. I think taping would start at midday or 1 o'clock. So we'd get there 9 o'clock or 9:30, rehearse whatever songs we were going to play with the cameras and with the artists, and that was it.
Wow.
And then after the first year, we ended up going live to air. So from about 92, we were live to air. So we'd get there at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. A lot of it was just sitting around. We would rehearse. Yeah. If we were playing with an artist, we would rehearse with an artist, maybe run the song 5 times. We usually ran it once just to run the chart. Then we'd run it with the artist. So, we'd run it as a band, and they'd bring the artist out to just sit in front of the band and make sure that they're happy with the arrangement. And then after that, we'd do probably another three runs with cameras, so that all the cameras, they can get their positions. That was pretty much a day of Hey Hey It's Saturday. And beyond that, we just sat around the rest of the time. For me, I was always got to hang out with whoever drummers that would come on. And in that time, there was a lot of great drummers that came onto the show. We had people like Mick Fleetwood was on the show. Vinnie Colaiuta was on there with Sting. Jerry Brown, Buddy Williams was on the show.
I think I remember the Jerry Brown one.
Yeah, he was on with Stevie Wonder.
With Stevie, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Jerry Brown was on with George Benson. Gary Novak was on there with Alanis Morissette. So there was always just drummers to hang out with, and let alone the local guys. Kerry Buchanan would be on, or Virgil would be on. I think Gordon might have been on with somebody. It was a beautiful, sort of enjoyable time to hang out.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what was the other 6 days of your week?
Teaching.
Okay.
Let's
go back to that then. Sorry. When did you start? You started teaching about 16.
Yeah, I started teaching during my first year of college. So I was 16 when I started.
Right. Was that out of necessity to make money to get you through the college, or you just wanted to teach?
I wanted to teach because,
cool.
I had such a good teacher in Frank that I sort of wanted to. I wanted to do that as well. I like the idea of sharing information. So, I wanted to teach, and it was a little bit of extra money. I can't even remember what I charged back in those days, but I was just teaching a few kids. And, that was always I always had a few students. When Hey Hey started, then the student thing went crazy.
Right. Due to you being recognised?
Yeah, because because I also released a video at that stage too. So I had an instructional video, and because of the TV gig, I was getting a lot of people asking for wanting to study with me.
Awesome.
So that it was really great. Like seriously, like I'd be a nobody if it wasn't for that gig.
Right.
Because
I wouldn't know who you are.
No.
And here you are on the Gig Life podcast. I mean,
the other 6 days were just doing gigs with other bands. I led my own band called Venice Beach, which was a fusion band. So we had a regular Tuesday night gig for a year or so, and then I would on Sundays I would play in a Jewish wedding band. I just did everything. I'd do recording sessions during the week for different things. Back in those days, you'd still do sessions for, TV commercials and, music for docos and stuff like that. So, the 90s were a great period for me because I was doing exactly what I wanted.
Yep. Of all the acts, you got a lot of acts come on that show. Were you ever picked to go and tour with them, or if they sat and they played with you and thought, oh man, I like the way this guy plays, I want him on my record, or I want him to come on tour with me? Was there ever those opportunities?
Not that I can recall, to be honest with you.
Yep.
I don't know that ever happened because I was just so into doing that show anyway that getting me out of town would have been really I wouldn't have been into it.
Yeah, of course. Now the whole goofball thing that you had going on at Hey Hey, you stick your head into a shot where you weren't supposed to, and how did that start? Did you just do it one day and the producers went, hey man, that's great, keep doing it, or you just did it anyway?
No, I did it. I did it because the piano player in the band used to do it. So the piano player it was Peter McCutcheon, and he used to do it. But before I was involved in the show, when I was just watching it on TV, he would always stick his head in the camera. And he used to crack me up. Okay. And so I started doing it. And then what was really funny was there was a couple of shows. There was a show I couldn't do, and I got Jerry Pantazis to fill in for me. And Jerry did it, which was beautiful. It was brilliant. Like, he was filling in for me, and he was actually doing the same thing as well.
Yeah,
it was a zany show. We were allowed to have fun, and I had some very enjoyable comedic moments, of my own that I got to experience, which was fun.
That's awesome. Towards the end, did you see the writing on the wall that it was going to?
Yeah, and I think by that stage, I think probably for the last 2 years of the show, the band had less and less to do. Like, that they didn't have as many artists coming on that we would back, and so we were just basically going in there to play in and out of commercial breaks and the Pluck a Duck theme and all of that sort of stuff. And I think I may have been looking for a way out. It's sort of, this is the first time I've ever spoken about it, but it was like, like the relationship between me and that show was sort of coming to an end anyway. Mm-hmm. Because, I always wanted to play, and I loved when we got to play with people, and that just wasn't happening. So it kind of, I wouldn't say it got boring, but I just felt that, why are they hiring us?
Right.
Why are they spending all this money on a band if they don't want us to do anything? So, and I think also by that stage, the show was starting to lose some ratings, and, that's not to say that when I found out that the show was axed, I was quite sad. I was sad because I was about to become a dad,
Okay.
And so there was that, I just lost my gig, and I've got a
Yeah,
kid
right.
that's going to come out in a month or something.
Mm.
But also I just felt sad because it was the end of an era. So whether I was involved in it or not, I would have been sad anyway, because it was an end of an era, and that era has never been replaced. That show was really the last of the Australian variety shows, like
Right.
proper variety shows.
Yeah. Yep. There was a bit of a shot at a comeback. Were you part of that?
No, well, basically what happened in 2009, they did two reunion shows. I was still living in London, so I flew out to do those two shows. And then the first show was really great. The second show was massively controversial. And then in 2010, they brought the show back for 20 weeks. And I wasn't involved in it. By that stage,
Right.
I had just moved back to Australia, and I was touring, doing a musical, actually, which is West Side Story. So they decided, I think Darryl decided to put in a completely new band.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the UK. You ended
Yeah.
up going over there for a while. So what was that for?
I always wanted to have an experience of living outside of Australia. I mean, obviously, living in the US would have been, that was my main goal. But for whatever reason, circumstances led to me moving to London, and as a result of that, because my parents are from Malta. I was able to get a European passport, which meant that I wasn't going to have any issues, living and working in the UK. Whereas in the US, it would have been, somehow I would have had to have gotten a green card. So I had moved there with this passport, and then I got a gig teaching at a drumming school in London called Drum Tech. And so I taught there for the whole time that I was there, for the 4 years, and then I did gigs there. I just played, Ronnie Scott's and all these other clubs in London, and did some touring. Played in different parts of Europe. It was great.
Was that drum tech related to the Australian drum tech? Or
No, it's a completely different thing.
Yep.
With it spelt differently.
Oh, okay. So TECH instead of the TEK. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yep. Cool. When did you leave the UK to come back? What made you come back? And what did you do when you got back here?
All right. So, I basically left the UK because the global financial crisis had hit, and the gigs had dried up.
Right.
And I was sort of effectively homeless by this stage, and I was really struggling. So I decided to move back. And then, so that was 10 years ago that I moved back. And I think on the second day that I was back, I got offered to tour playing drums on West Side Story.
Right. This is around the time that that next run of Hey Hey was going, like you just said
that's
before.
Right. So I moved back. I did that tour for 8 months. I managed to save a fair bit of money, which was really handy because I was really down to my last $2,000 when I was living in London. That's Australian dollars, not pounds. So it wasn't going to get me far. So I moved back, got that gig, toured, saved money. And then after that, I found it really hard to break back into the scene. It took, I reckon, 3 or 4 years, certainly for people to stop thinking that I was just visiting from the UK. So breaking back into the Melbourne scene was harder than breaking into the London scene.
Really?
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
Right. And a lot of the guys that were there when you left, were they still there, or was it a whole new breed of players coming through?
It was a bit of both, actually. Like Jerry was, Jerry was, still playing lots of gigs and still is playing lots of gigs as he was when I left.
Mm.
But then other players emerged, like Daniel Farrugia was, who's not related to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was doing a lot of things. He was doing a lot of really good work. So there was him. So I was kind of up against up against some serious heavyweights, you know, and then there's all the other players who were, you know, not drummers who, you know, I would go and check out, you know, young bass players and singers who started booking me for gigs. So, you know, that the scene was pretty healthy, although the kind of work that I enjoyed doing didn't exist anymore. So when I got back, you know, the studio scene had pretty much died, and there was really not much in the way of television work. So, yeah, it sort of took a little bit of adjusting to get back, and just when I got back, and also just getting to know people, you know, who had sort of moved into the scene. And, you know, so there was a lot of drummers who'd moved into Melbourne from interstate. So I was getting to know those people as well.
2008, you wrote this in your newsletter that you nearly gave it away. So was this kind of a culmination of not being able to get those gigs? And
that was actually 2018.
18. Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yes. I went through a phase where I was, you know, I just sort of kept asking myself, you know, why am I not getting the gigs that I want? And so it was really terrible. Like I was starting to feel very, you know, excluded. And it's really just my own imagination, to be honest with you, that was making me feel that way, because, you know, I was still doing gigs, but I kept thinking, you know, why is he doing that gig? Why is she doing that gig? Why aren't I doing that gig? You know, and then I kept going through that. It was a little bit pathetic, to be honest with you, but I just thought, man, maybe my time is up. Maybe this is it, and maybe I'm done. You know, and then what had happened was I did a gig of playing some music that I really enjoyed, and I filmed it, and I watched the footage back, and I was kind of reminded myself that when I was a 15-year-old starting to take lessons, if I could have a look at that footage as a 15-year-old, I would have been sort of somewhat happy, because I was doing what I set out to do as a 15-year-old. Right. And so that's where my comfort came from, that I was reminded that I was on track. And so that, you know, that was a bit of a shift in my mental state. You know, I think it's important to always remind yourself why you got into this industry. As hard as it is, man, it's very hard now. So it's good to remind yourself why you got in it, and just give yourself the opportunity to always do those things that you love. If it's playing a particular type of music that you love, then, you know, you've got to do it.
When did you get the idea to start the YouTube channel?
The idea, my girlfriend was really saying, man, you got to do this. You got to do this. And I kept putting it off. I kept putting it off because I was so intimidated by the learning curve involved when it came to editing video. And I just got to a point where I thought, well, you know what? I've got to do it. So Lana really encouraged me. So I ended up, you know, getting a bad sort of old version of Final Cut Pro, and learnt how to use a camera, and it did some basic editing, and it actually sucked, and I was really bad at it. And then I just became very nerdy about it, and sort of learnt more about camera settings, learnt more about editing, color grading, you know, just all of that sort of stuff. I was never happy with how I was angling the cameras, and, you know, and you know, I ended up buying some sort of fairly inexpensive pieces of equipment, like, you know, a good softbox lighting. Bought one of those, and I ended up using, you know, like I've got an iPhone 11. That's my second camera.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, so now I've got two cameras, and I watched videos like Mike Johnson's videos always look really beautiful. So he's my benchmark. He's one guy I would really love to meet and hang out with him. I kind of love where he's at. So it will always improve. So, if I get extra money, I'll buy a better camera. Also, I record the drums into Pro Tools. So, the first thing I do is mix the drums in Pro Tools and then import all the footage. So there was all of that stuff that I had to learn. And that's what kind of put me off doing it for a long time. Now that I'm into it, I got to say it's definitely made me happy. And it's sort of given me a sense of relevance and connected to the community, because now it's not just the local community, like the local drumming community, but it's a worldwide community. And and it's also like having my own TV show.
Yeah, that's cool. I like the stretch video. That's the stretch that I was taught by when I was in New Zealand, the ex-symphony orchestra percussionist drummer, Norman Gadd, his name was.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and he taught me that. My first lesson, the stick, twisting the stick, and then, having your inverted elbows. And it was cool to see that.
Yeah, I thought I'd put that up there. I've collected so much information over the years, and I'm at this point committed to doing a video every week. That may change, in the future, depending on other things that happen as a result of that. But I'm loving it. I'm loving the connection that I have with drummers, and it's something I never thought I'd do, but I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would. That's
cool. You talk about like the quality of the videos and Mike Johnson being the sort of the benchmark. Your videos look very, very good, and they sound very, very good. During this, all the stuff that's going on, musicians all out of work now. I'm envisioning lots of musicians getting into the online video type thing. I know personally, when I'm looking through something to look at and I start playing it and it looks and it sounds shit, I'm not going to watch it. So, it's all about that quality, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was afraid of, because if the sound wasn't good, if the drum sound wasn't good, people are going to be less prepared to engage with it. And then same with, if they can't hear what I'm saying. So those elements are very important to me. And then, if it looks good, then that's great too. So I want it to have a professional look about it, and just something that people are going to enjoy tuning into every week.
Yeah, that's great. You don't mind a bit of woodworking yourself? Hey, don't mind using the old chisel I think your stuff on your Instagram is awesome, man.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So how long have you been into that stuff?
A couple of years. I mean, I did. So when I was a little kid, I'd go around to my grandparents' place because they lived up the street from me. My granddad was always, making stuff out of wood. So he kind of taught me a few things as a kid, like how to use a coping saw, how to use a plane, and how to use a soldering iron, all that sort of stuff. And then, so by the time I got to high school, I went to a tech school. So they had, sheet metal and woodwork and, tool making and stuff like that. So I did all of those subjects, and then that was it. After I stopped doing that, was the end of it, And then a couple of years ago, I was actually on tour, and I just went down that. You know how you go down that YouTube rabbit hole?
Yeah.
I went down that rabbit hole, and I ended up watching videos on how to cut dovetails. Yep. And man, I'm not kidding you. I was addicted. I just got hooked. Awesome. And I went to my parents' place and picked out some tools that I owned when I was a kid, and sort of started collecting tools. I started restoring old tools that my grandparents had passed on to me. And it's became an obsession.
Are you still into it now? Are you still doing it now?
I just haven't had time. I haven't
Yeah.
had time lately. I'm actually for the last couple of days, you may have seen this on Instagram. I hand built a giant like a big workbench.
Yep.
And I've basically just resurfaced it. So basically involved planing the top of it back to bare wood, making sure it was all out of twist, let's say, and then just refinishing that now. So it's sort of like a new lease on life.
That's awesome. Let's talk about what the future may possibly hold. I mean, you would have had a few days to think about things. What's your sort of take on what's about to happen, what's happening?
There's, like my biggest concern for me personally, and I would say this for everyone in my position, all of us, is financial. I mean, it's like when you're a musician, there's a certain degree of financial or a lack of financial security. Unless you teach, at a school and you're on salary and all of that sort of stuff, you probably have less to worry about. But I don't teach at a school. I basically just teach privately and I do gigs. So there's that financial concern. All of this current crisis aside, I've been thinking about, how I want to secure my future anyway. And I do have a plan with the YouTube channel. So, I have a 3-year plan, and that is 3 years from when I started the channel, maybe 7 months back or 8 months back. I want to have amassed a large subscriber base, and then have video content that you can buy. So, for example, I might have a 5 video package that you can download on how to play jazz or, how to play this sort of thing or whatever. And that, I've got to say, that's where the woodwork thing has been really helpful, because I'm not kidding you, thousands of woodwork videos. and the way it works there is that, like there might be a guy who's going to make a workbench. And so you watch, part 1 of the workbench, and then you watch, a 3-part video series on how to build a workbench. So you go to the guy's website, and then you can download the plans for $5. That's that business model. And so I want to do something like that with me. So I'm going to have products that you can download, like there will eventually be a PDF for just about every video that you can download for $1. In addition to that, I bought a bunch of leather the other day, so I'm going to be making leather drum key holders, which will be available on my website. In addition to that, my 2 books, Groove Perspectives and the Groove Perspectives Play Along, will be ebooks, which you can download any part of the world. So you can get from like the bookstore at Apple or whatever. And it's going to be sort of partly merchandise driven as well, like really nice T-shirts. That's the plan.
Awesome. I
think I'm getting to an age where I don't enjoy lugging gear around so much. So I'd rather sort of play a little less and just put more effort into and energy into the YouTube channel. And then once that is, earning me some money, then I can just go out and play the gigs that I want to do, like put my own band together. I mean, I've still not played my own music live, even though I released my first album 8 years ago, and I still haven't played that music live.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right now, because everybody's home, it's a good time to be promoting this stuff, these videos, because I found myself in the last couple of days, of course, you get right into that social media thing and all this fear and all the shit going on, but then I find myself going to look for stuff that I enjoy, that looks good, that makes me happy and sounds good, So, this is where around the time I'm researching for this interview with you, I saw your videos and I just thought how bloody good they look and how great they sound, So
yeah, I guess
definitely,
I
definitely
guess the other half of my answer to what you were saying, I guess, is that apart from those financial concerns, we have all this time now, and so we are essentially creative people. So we've got that combined with all the technology that's available to us, smartphone technology which allows us to, make nice looking footage, which we can just instantly upload to YouTube or Facebook. So I think it's going to make people more. It's going to force people to be a bit more creative with what they do, and also coming up with creative ways to then secure some financial security as well.
Yeah, because the last couple of days there's been a lot of live streaming going on, but also a lot of people like posting pictures of their really crappy looking home studio and not much thought and effort has gone into it. So, personally for me, it's kind of, I just scroll along till I see something that looks really good, you know what I mean? So, I think in this case, you might stand out there. So
I hope so.
Good. Oh, this is an observation on a Instagram photo I saw when you were in Iceland.
Yeah.
You're wearing an All Blacks beanie.
I was.
Do you know? Yeah. What's going on there?
Well, I'll tell you, my parents, my parents have done 3 cruises to New Zealand,
right?
And on every trip they've bought me souvenirs.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the duty-free beanies for sure. Because I've got a couple myself.
Yeah, it's that they've. I always ask for I always ask them to get me a tiki, and so I've got a couple of those. And on the 3rd trip, they couldn't find one. Like so I ended up buying me this sort of brass kiwi.
Right.
But there's always the t-shirts, or I think I've got a beanie as well, an All Blacks beanie, and a New Zealand cap. So I wore I was wearing the All Blacks beanie last year on our travels.
I saw the location of where the photo was taken, and I clicked on it, and I had to zoom out, and it said it was in Iceland.
Yeah, that's right. We were in Iceland this time last year, actually.
Yeah. I asked like a question on Facebook. Like I was going to be talking to you today. Was there anything we wanted to talk about? So a couple of people replied. One of them was Hey, so we've already talked about that. Guy named Stuart Anderson, he said he saw and photographed you doing the Paul Simon show with Grace Knight and Wendy Matthews last year.
That's right.
The band did an amazing job of recreating the sounds of many more musicians that were on the stage. It would be interesting to hear how he approaches those songs so that enough drums and percussion are covered to stay true to the originals.
That's interesting. So that gig with Wendy and Grace is a Paul Simon, playing the music of Paul Simon, and which includes some Simon and Garfunkel songs. But that's actually the second Paul Simon gig I've done. So the first one I did was another band called One Trick Pony, and we're playing basically that whole album, One Trick Pony, which is Steve Gadd. So I was sort of familiar with that music and that style of playing, or at least those songs especially. By the time we got to do Wendy and Grace's gig, there was obviously a lot more material to learn, because they sort of went back in history and did more of the sort of Simon and Garfunkel things as well. In terms of the parts, I get to play 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover late in the evening. Great drum tracks, great drum parts. But there's a lot of other songs with really nice drum parts, like I'm trying to remember the name of the song. I think Steve Gadd plays on it, and it's sort of like playing brushes on a snare drum with the wires turned off, but you're playing 16th notes. So you're not necessarily playing like a jazz drummer would with brushes, but just more playing a single stroke 16th note thing with accents. And just trying to replicate those things so that they sound like the record, but but make it sort of as percussive as I can. So songs like You Can Call Me Al, I've ripped off the drum part from that. And there's a couple of other things like Boy in the Bubble, trying to rip off those parts pretty much as they are on the record. In terms of the groove, no, I don't copy the fills and all that sort of stuff, but it's just try to be stylistically accurate. I mean, if this person is saying that it sounds quite full for a 4-piece band, then we're all, doing what's required of us in that case, I guess.
That's great. Awesome. Well, Darryn Farrugia, thanks so much for being on the Gig Life podcast. Like I said, it's been a real honour to talk to you, and you were a massive influence and inspiration on me early on in my drumming career, seeing you on Hey Hey. So it's really cool to be sitting here talking to you, man. So it's a buzz. It's a real trip.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Nah, sweet ass. Good luck with everything, and stay safe and stay smart, and we'll see you on the other side of this Corona thing. Craziness.
Cheers, man. Thank you so much.
All right, Darryn. Take it easy, man.
See you, Stevie.
All right.
Bye.
See you, bro.
Bye.
Bye.